10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 275. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 275 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. As always, thanks for joining us again for yet another episode. Today we are into our Lick of the Month episode, and this one's going to be a little bit different. Rather than choosing an artist, I have prepared some licks for you using some of the stuff we've been talking about in our Triad series. So that's what we're going to get into today. As always, wanted to let you know that you can get the PDFs and recordings for this episode and every episode we've ever done by going to our Patreon page. We are a listener-supported podcast. That means that we do not rely on advertising. Instead, we rely on the generosity of regular listeners just like you, and we give you some fantastic rewards in exchange for that support that you give us each and every month. So you can find out the details for that by going to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, and get yourself signed up today for instant access to all those materials. Wanted to give a quick shout out to our new patrons. Thank you to our new $5 patrons, Josh and Bob. And thank you to our new $3 patron, Benjamin. We really appreciate you guys signing up. And of course, to the over 350 people that are already signed up over there, we thank you for your ongoing support. So again, that's 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on one of the Patreon banners. Get yourself signed up today. All right, so let's jump into today's episode. So last week, we did some pretty tough triad exercises where we started to mix up the orders with which we were playing the triads. We started to investigate starting on different notes in the triad, and generally we just got a lot more difficult. And I did mention that you had to really work on those basic exercises before you started to work on the ones that I presented to you last week in episode 274. This week is going to be kind of the application part of all the stuff that I've presented to you. So we're going to take a look at a 2-5-1 and investigate some of the sounds that we can achieve by using some of these patterns that we've worked on in a creative way to get some different and more interesting sounds. Now, I also wanted to mention that this is probably the stuff that I work on in my practicing the most out of anything. I am just so interested in this triadic sound, and I really think it's where jazz is moving these days. If you listen to a lot of the modern players, they're really starting to embrace this triadic approach to harmony, and you'll hear a lot of this kind of material coming out in a lot of the records that are hitting the scene. So I think if you're looking to, sort of reflect where the music is going and where some of the new harmony is headed and new styles of playing, this is going to be really, really valuable stuff for you to work on. So without further ado, let's jump into the first exercise. So what I've done is I've taken some of the orders that we talked about last week and I've actually applied it over a 2-5-1. So if you look at the PDF, you will see that the 2-5-1 is in the key of concert C every single time. And what I'm doing is I'm applying these different triadic patterns over the top of that 2-5-1. So if we look at example number 1, we've got regular old 2-5-1, D minor 7 to G7 to C concert. And then what I am applying is the chromatic triadic pattern superimposed over the top of that. So every 2 beats, I'm using a different triad. We are starting on a regular concert C triad over that concert D minor chord. Then I'm going to D flat major, then D major, then E flat, and then finally, I'm resolving that to a concert C major 7 chord. So let's check out what it sounds like, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I chose to start with actually a pretty out one. That chromatic triadic pattern results in some pretty crazy sounding lines, but I figured I would start with that one because after all, we did work on that for a while, right? We practiced playing those major triads in a chromatic order, both ascending and descending. And what you'll notice is it's actually a pretty simple pattern. I'm starting each one of the triads from the root, but I'm changing the rhythm. I've got a triplet in that first triad, and then I'm changing the direction that I'm playing. So each one, the C, the D flat, the D, and the E flat, they all start from the roots, but I'm going ascending, descending, and that's really what makes it interesting, but it's not all that complicated. If you practiced a lot of those patterns that I gave you, this should be something that you can conceive of and pull off actually pretty easily. Right? Now, how did I choose C as my first triad to start this process of going up by half steps? Well, what I did was I kind of looked at the last triad I wanted to use, so the concert E flat, and I figured that would be a really, really great one to resolve to C because I've got the note E flat in the last triad that I can resolve to E over the C major chord. So that was part of my decision. Now, you could choose to start on a bunch of different triads, but I want you to do it for a reason. I want you to think about where the line is going to end up, where it's going to resolve, and sort of work your way backward like we do a lot when we think about some of the concepts we talk about on this show. We work backward a ton because that, again, that most important part of the 2-5-1 is the resolution when we hit that one chord. So that's going to be the first thing in my mind. So there's example number one. Let's look at example number two. So now we have a completely different order. Now we are actually using triads that are a major third apart. So we're starting on concert G, we're going to concert B, then we're going to concert E flat, then we come back to concert G, and then we hit that C major 7 chord at the end of it. So all the triads are a major third apart. And remember, this runs back into itself after 3 triads. You're back on the one that you started on. And I think this is kind of a cool sound as well. So let's hear it, and then we'll talk about it. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this one's kind of cool because it starts pretty inside, then it goes way outside when we're playing over that B and that E flat sound, and then actually before the resolution, it comes back in pretty nicely because we're just playing the regular 5 chord before we resolve to that 1 chord. So I love this. It's like consonance, dissonance, consonance, and then you resolve that. So let's explore the patterns that I'm using. These patterns are a little bit more complicated. Starting the G triad on the 5th, and then as I move to the B triad, I'm starting that one on the 3rd, starting the E flat triad on the 3rd, and then starting the final G triad on the 3rd. So I'm mixing this one up a lot. I'm also playing a lot of different patterns. If you really study example number 2, you're going to notice that it's not like example number 1 where I'm using a pretty consistent pattern. I'm trying to mix this one up as much as possible, which reflects how I would actually play that in a real life situation. So that one's a little bit more complicated, but I love the sound of that. All right, let's move on to example number 3. This one is my favorite one out of all of them, and this one uses a whole step triad pattern. So I'm starting with an F major triad, then I'm moving to a G major triad, then I'm moving to an A major triad, then a B major triad, and then I'm resolving that all to that C major chord. So let's listen to it first, and then we'll talk about it a bit. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the thing I love about this pattern is that you get the really interesting note combinations by simply playing those different triads over the top of the chords that are happening. But you can also hear this overarching pattern of the triads moving by whole steps going up. So you get this kind of double effect when you're playing this particular pattern. And I think this is one of the things that makes it just so fun for me to use this pattern, and why I like the sound of it so much is you get that kind of combined effect. So again, the reason why I chose to start on an F major triad is because I knew if I did that, I would be playing a B major triad right before I resolved to the C major chord. So that's how I decided to start with that F and move up by whole steps. There are a lot of other possibilities that you could discover by thinking about what triad you want to hear before the resolution point. I can think of a bunch of examples of cool triads to hear on beat 3 and 4 of the 5 chord that will resolve really nicely to that C chord, and the B major is only one of those possibilities. Now again, I am mixing up the pattern a little bit with this. The F major triad, I'm starting on the root. The G major, I'm starting on the 5th. The A major, I'm starting on the 3rd. And the B major, I'm starting on the 5th. Okay, and again, there's like infinite possibilities when it comes to different combinations of patterns that you could use with that exact same pattern of triads. So this is really, really deep, right? You could work on this for a lifetime and not exhaust the different possibilities of what triads to choose. And then the specific way that you are going to play those triads, meaning like what direction, what transition points are you going to make. So it really is, a lifetime of work, just this one concept. But the cool part is that you could really like base most of your harmonic language on these triads if you want to go that route. I imagine some of you will be very, very interested in this, and some of you might want to go in a different direction, but it's important to explore all of these sounds at our fingertips. Okay, so hopefully you got something out of this episode and this series. We're going to do a tune of the month next week, and I'm going to employ some of these same things, but in the context of an etude over an entire form. If you have any questions on any of this stuff, good place to get in touch with me is the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group, or you can always email me at 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. Remember to get your hands on all the PDFs and everything by going to our Patreon site, 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on one of the Patreon banners, and you will get all of the lines that we talked about today in every key, and you'll be able to be a little more hands-on with that stuff rather than just listening to it on the show. All right, thanks for tuning in. As always, I hope everybody's staying safe and healthy out there, and we will see you next time with a brand new episode. Have a good weekend, everybody. Bye.